The scream never came, not from the child, not from the woman standing frozen near the black luxury car, and not from the man in orange who dropped his green trash bag the instant he saw the small body stumble off the curb. In the bright, ordinary daylight of a quiet suburban street, the world almost lost a little girl who had never made a sound in her life, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any noise could have been. Her name was Aria Whitmore, the only daughter of a billionaire real estate magnate whose glass towers cut the skyline miles away. Aria had been born into wealth so immense that entire hospital wings bore her family name, yet she had entered the world without a voice. Doctors had called it a rare neurological condition, complicated, uncertain, and possibly permanent. From the moment she learned to walk, Aria learned also to live inside a quiet bubble where words never came out, only wide eyes and soft gestures. Her mother, Celeste Whitmore, dressed impeccably even for school drop-offs, carried that silence like a visible crack through her polished life. No matter how many specialists she hired or therapies she tried, nothing filled the absence. And on this morning, with sunlight bouncing off manicured lawns and expensive cars, Celeste had been distracted by a phone call about stock fluctuations when Aria slipped from her side and wandered toward the street. The man in orange was named Jonah Reyes. He was 34, a single father, and every sunrise found him lifting bins and tying bags with hands already rough from years of labor. His wife had died 3 years earlier from a sudden illness, leaving him with a 5-year-old son and a life that felt like it had collapsed inward overnight. Jonah had taken extra shifts, early routes, anything to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. He drove the garbage truck not because he loved it, but because it was honest work, steady work, and it kept him moving when standing still hurt too much. That morning, sweat already darkened his collar as he knelt to pick up a bag, his thoughts drifting to whether his son Mateo remembered to pack his lunch. When Jonah looked up, he saw Aria step into the street just as a delivery van rounded the corner faster than it should have. Instinct ripped through him. He lunged, dropping everything, his boots scraping pavement as he grabbed the back of her dress and yanked her toward him. The van screeched, brakes screaming in protest, missing them by inches. Aria fell against Jonah's chest, her small hands clutching his vest. She did not cry. She did not scream. She only stared up at him, eyes wide, chest rising fast, as if trying to understand how close the world had come to ending. Celeste's phone hit the grass. She ran, heels sinking into the lawn, her heart pounding louder than any sound her daughter could not make. She wrapped her arms around Aria, checking her over frantically, tears streaking through her carefully applied makeup. Jonah stepped back, suddenly aware of the dirt on his gloves, the smell of refuse clinging to his clothes. He nodded once, muttered an apology for startling them, and reached for his fallen bag. To him, it was just what anyone would have done. To Celeste, it felt like witnessing a miracle wrapped in fluorescent orange. If you are watching Kind Soul Narratives right now and you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, this is the moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the smallest acts of humanity change everything. Life, however, did not transform in a single instant. Jonah returned to his route, his heart still racing, replaying the near miss over and over in his mind. That night, he hugged Mateo longer than usual, breathing in the scent of soap and crayons, silently promising to always be there. Celeste, on the other hand, could not sleep. The image of that garbage man diving without hesitation haunted her in a way that board meetings never had. She realized how insulated her life had become, how money had built walls around her pain instead of healing it. Aria, sitting quietly in her room, lined up her toy animals just as she always did, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, as if searching for something she could not name. Days passed, and fate stitched their lives together again. Jonah's route included the Whitmore neighborhood twice a week. At first, Celeste watched from a distance, curiosity mixing with gratitude and guilt. She noticed how Jonah always waved at children, how he bent down to their level, how his face softened when they smiled back. Aria noticed too. She began waiting by the window on collection mornings, her small fingers pressed to the glass. When Jonah waved, she lifted her hand slowly, a shy imitation. Something inside her stirred, unfamiliar and warm. Jonah never asked questions. He never tried to fill the silence with awkward chatter. When Arya started standing at the end of the driveway with her mother, Jonah simply smiled and knelt, showing her how the truck worked, letting her touch the cool metal, the thick gloves. He treated her not as broken, not as fragile, but as present. Celeste watched this with a tight ache in her chest, realizing how often people had spoken around her daughter instead of to her, how silence had made adults uncomfortable, impatient. At home, Jonah struggled. Bills piled up, and the truck's engine trouble meant fewer hours some weeks. Mateo asked why other kids had two parents. Jonah had no answers that didn't hurt. He carried his grief quietly, the way men like him often did, packing it down beneath responsibility. The only time he felt light was when he saw Arya's face brighten at the sight of the truck, when her eyes followed his movements as if he mattered in a way beyond his job. Celeste eventually did something radical. She invited Jonah and Mateo for lunch. Not as a charity gesture, not as a publicity move, but because something inside her needed to understand the man who had saved her child. Sitting at the long dining table that usually hosted investors, Jonah felt out of place, his hands folded tightly, his posture stiff. Mateo stared wide-eyed at the size of the house. Arya sat across from Jonah, swinging her feet, watching him with quiet intensity. No one spoke about money. No one spoke about diagnoses. They spoke about school, about trucks, about favorite foods. The simplicity felt revolutionary. Weeks turned into months. Arya began therapy sessions again, but this time something was different. Her therapists noticed she was more engaged, more responsive. At home, she mimicked the hum of the garbage truck, a soft vibration in her throat that startled Celeste the first time she heard it. Jonah, unaware of these developments, continued his routine, unaware that his presence had become an anchor for a child drifting in silence. The breakthrough came on an ordinary morning, sunlight filtering through leaves, birds hopping along the sidewalk. Jonah lifted a bin when he felt a familiar small presence nearby. Arya stood at the curb, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her body trembling with effort. Celeste watched from behind, her breath caught. Jonah smiled and waved, turning back to his work. Then it happened. A sound, fragile and cracked, pushed its way into the air. It was not a word, not yet, but it was unmistakably a voice. The world seemed to stop. Jonah turned slowly, his eyes widening. Arya's face contorted with effort and fear, then broke into a grin so bright it seemed to light the street. Tears streamed down Celeste's face as she dropped to her knees, her hands covering her mouth to keep from sobbing too loudly, as if afraid sound itself might scare the miracle away. Jonah knelt, his own eyes burning, his chest tight with an emotion he could barely name. He did not reach for Arya. He did not speak. He simply stayed, present, steady, as she found the courage to exist beyond silence. News spread quickly, but Celeste refused interviews. This was not a headline to her, it was a sacred moment. She funded programs quietly, supported speech therapy centers without putting her name on plaques. Jonah was offered money, rewards, opportunities to tell his story. He declined most of them. What he accepted instead was a job offer managing a community outreach program Celeste started, one that paid fairly and allowed him to be home with Mateo in the evenings. Dignity mattered more than charity. Right before we reach the final moments of this story, take a second to comment below and share what this journey made you feel, because your words keep stories like this alive. If this story has touched your heart in any way, please support Kind Soul Narratives by liking, sharing, and subscribing, because your support helps these moments of humanity reach others who need them. Years later, on another bright morning, Arya stood confidently on a small stage at a community event, her voice clear and strong as she thanked the people who had helped her find it. Jonah stood in the crowd with Mateo, his arm around his son's shoulders, pride swelling in his chest. Celeste watched too, no longer defined by her wealth.